Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys so much for being here and watching. Today is our Virgo full moon, and I wanted to take the time to talk to you guys a little bit about something that I've thought about a lot, and that is the lots. Perhaps more specifically, to talk about or argue whether or not you ought to reverse the calculations of the lots by day and night. I know, some very, very hard-hitting, controversial, timely things to talk about. So I imagine everybody who is watching this probably has some familiarity with the lots and has heard about them, but if you haven't, or maybe your idea of them is a little bit foggy, that's okay. The lots are basically a secondary signification system, which are determined by the relationship between 2 points projected from a third. So basically the idea is like, okay, you have this planet and this planet, they're 117 degrees apart. If we take that 117 degrees and we, project it from the ascendant, wherever that spot falls, that's our lot. That's kind of the basic idea. So it's two things, point A, the distance between point A and B, mimicked or mirrored from a point C. So the reason why I call them secondary signification systems is partly, as I described, their positions are determined not by any like hard-coded thing, like you can't like watch the lots orbit the sky and project their positions in the future just like on their own, but they're determined by other things that are calculated first. So like you get your quill and your ink pen, your table of your ephemeris and your table of houses, and you would calculate out your chart, your houses and your planets, because we're in ye olde times. And then from there you would have the information that you needed to do the lots. So secondary because they're not like the first things calculated. You have to have something calculated first to then do them. But also because a lot of the significations of the lots themselves, what the lots mean, are often just sort of like repeats of other things. So lots might be able to get you more granular looks at like very specific things. Like there's a lot of like siblings, for instance. But like in your chart, you already have the third house, which represents siblings, and the ruler of the third house, which represents siblings, and those I would consider more like primary significators. But a lot about a specific topic might be like a secondary, give you a little bit more information about it, about that thing, than maybe you get just from kind of your main things. We first see the lots introduced into astrology in Greek astrology, through Greek-speaking cultures in Hellenistic astrology. But after a certain point of time, authors started to refer to the lots as the Arabic parts, which is something that is, in my opinion, a little bit pejorative of a thing to call them, partly because they're not Arabic in origin, they're Greek. But the idea is that under the Persian and Arabic astrologers, the lots really sort of took off. We went from having kind of like a small number of lots to just like lots for everything. Lots of lots, the lot of lots, the lot of lots. Like they really just kind of took off and ran with the idea that we could make points between different points in a chart, between different placements in a chart, and just really come up with a bunch of stuff. So sort of like the Arabic period really came out with like very granular, very specific lots to handle very specific topics. So like you'll see a bunch of lots. If you go through like the lists, you'll see lots for like agricultural products and commodities, the lots of like apples and barley and things like that, which are only, useful in very specific circumstances. But at the heart of it, the lots and their application in astrology and the idea of kind of lots and lotteries in general are very culturally Greek and Roman. Divination by casting lots was very popular in Greek and Roman culture, and lots are something that's used in myth and in civics. The idea is that a lottery, casting lots, was seen as like the most fair way to solve a problem or to do a thing or to fill a post. So we would just, pull people's names out of a hat to do a thing. There were obviously some caveats in this because no matter kind of like what you do, there has to be some reality injected into it. So especially for like very skilled posts, we'll say, like, generals or surgeons or things like that, you wouldn't just put everybody's name in the hat and pull from it. Not everybody would get a chance to cast a lot. It would be kind of like from a smaller pool of qualified candidates. So it's not like a situation where it's like, well, the gods have decreed that Mary Beth over here, the milkmaid, is going to be our new Surgeon General. So she's going to do the best she can, everybody. Just bear with her. There was some level of like control and some screening, some vetting happening. But we do see the concept of lots mentioned a couple of times in myth, probably most famously the myth of Plato's story about the transmigration of souls, where upon death and before rebirth, different souls would cast lots to see kind of in what order they would choose their next lives, or even in sort of like classical Greek myth where Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon drew lots to figure out who would rule the underworld, the sea, and the sky. So very, very cultural phenomena, very Greek cultural phenomena that we now have in astrology. So that's the idea of lots and where they come from, just sort of like culturally, how they became ingrained into astrology. They are typically described as like a formula of some kind. So a lot of times in more modern books and websites, you'll see it be like the lot of fortune, sun plus moon minus ascendant or something. So the idea is like if you were to write out all the degrees of the zodiac from 0 to 360, so you'd be like 0 degrees Aries equals 1, 1 degree Aries equals 2, 2 degrees Aries equals 3, and go all the way until 29 degrees Pisces, this is 360. You could plug in the numbers. Sun is, this number. My sun's at this degree, moon's at this degree, my ascendant's at this degree, and you would get, whatever that number was in its corresponding zodiac degree is where your lot fell.
Hey team, this is Ryan in editing. So as I was watching the video back, I realized that I mischaracterized what the calculation formula for the lot of fortune was. In the video, I say that it's what the sun plus the moon minus the ascendant. That's not actually the calculation method for it. If you're going to do it kind of this algebraic way, it is the ascendant plus the moon minus the sun. And I went ahead and put up the example based on the example chart that I showed in the beginning with the ascendant at 10 degrees Cancer, the moon at 26 Gemini, and the sun at 29 Aquarius, which when you do the whole fancy smancy formula, gives you 7 degrees Scorpio as where the lot of fortune will fall. And so if you just kind of made that with numbers, it's 100 for 10 degrees Cancer, 86 for 26 Gemini, and 329 for 29 Aquarius. And so when you do that math, you get negative 143 as your answer, but you can't have a negative number here. So you add 360, the number of degrees in the zodiac, and that gets you to 217, which is 7 degrees of Scorpio. So make sure to always double check your sources before you just talk and say things off the cuff, because you're probably going to misremember your mathematical formulas, which is part of the reason why I did not do so well in math in school. But I just wanted to go ahead and make that correction in case somebody was like, wait a second, this doesn't sound right. It is in fact not right. Thank you so much.
And so real moment here. That's how I did it. Way back when I first got interested in astrology, I had a notebook that I was taking my astrology notes in, and on the first couple of pages was this writing out of the zodiac degrees, like literally as I said, like 0 degrees Aries equals 1, all the way through. And now that I say that, I was planning on telling this story to be like, haha, look at baby Ryan, he was so silly doing this thing. But I actually think that helped me out a lot. Now that I'm saying out loud, I'm like, that was actually very helpful for figuring out the difference between ordinal and cardinal numbers, which is something that is very topical to astrology when it comes to reading a lot of the old texts that talk about the exaltation of the moon is the 3rd degree of Taurus. That's not 3 degrees Taurus. That's 2 degrees Taurus. Mind blowing. I know, mind blowing. But that's a whole different conversation. But in his paper on the theory and rationale of the lots, Chris Brennan points out that this method of calculation of determining the lots is very algebraic. It's presented in an algebraic formula. Whereas initially in the older texts, the formulas, if you want to call them that, were presented much more geometrically. So it was not the moon plus the sun minus the ascendant or whatever, but it was from the sun to the moon from the ascendant. And it had this idea of repeating that distance, so you would take the distance from the sun to the moon, and then you would do that same distance from the ascendant, and that would be where your lot of fortune was, for instance. And I really like that conceptualization. I hadn't really thought about it that way, partly because I think my initial process of determining lots was algebraic, because that's what I did way back in the day before I had a computer program that did it for me, and I never thought about it again. But I really did like that framing of it. It is very geometric, and I think it makes it much easier to visualize mentally for people. Because if you're it's just your sun plus your moon minus the ascendant, I think I've said that formula both ways many different times. I'm not even sure what the right one is anymore. But when you present it that way, it's your sun plus your moon minus your ascendant. That sounds very silly. That's hard to who walks around knowing what degree of the zodiac their sun is and what its ecliptical degree is. I do, I guess, because I'm a crazy person. But most people don't know that their sun is in 117 degrees of the ecliptic. Like, that's not how we think about it. That's like 27 Cancer, I think. But if you tell them, oh, it's the distance between, it's the distance from your sun to your moon reflected from your ascendant, that becomes a little bit easier for people to visualize, where they can almost instantaneously get not maybe an exact position of where their lot is, but they'll know, oh, it's around this sign, like it's around this sign, it's in this house. You can get a good kind of like bird's eye view of it, a good quick glance to be like, oh, this is about where it is. So as time goes on, the number of lots just really explodes. But initially, what we believe we know about the lots is that they're started with about 7 or 9 of them. And this is sort of like our main class, our main kind of like first class of lots, which are typically called the Hermetic lots, because the idea is that they are lots that were given to us by Hermes Trismegistus, so they're Hermetic. And there are either 7 or 9, like I said. 7 relate to the planets. So you'll have like the lot of Fortune, which is said to be the lot of the moon, the lot of Daimon or Spirit, Daimon's a better word, which is the lot of the sun. You have Necessity, which is the lot of Mercury, Eros, the lot of Venus, Victory, the lot of Jupiter, Courage, the lot of Mars, and Nemesis, the lot of Saturn. And so these are sort of like the big heavy hitters. You have the lot of Fortune and the lot of Daimon are like the two most important lots, with a lot of Fortune really being the big mamma jamma of lots. Like even today, the lot of Fortune is the only lot which is routinely included in astrological software as a default planet setting. Like you don't have to go in and turn the lot of Fortune on. It's pretty much always on anywhere. But other lots are almost never included by default. You have to go in and turn them on specifically if you want them. So Fortune is the big mamma jamma. Fortune and Daimon are like the big two, the big pair here, the power couple. And then the other 5 Hermetic lots are just sort of like planetary lots. They're not as important, but they're still like considered first class as far as lots are concerned. And then from here you might have like the lot of Basis and the lot of Exaltation, which are other important lots that we see in the Hellenistic tradition. That were utilized with for various things, usually like eminence. So like how famous or well known somebody is going to be. Let's check a lot of Basis and Exaltation. But that's usually it. That's usually where you stop. Like you don't really see lots after that. Then by the time we get into like the Persian Arabic period, I sat down and I wrote down the lots that were listed in Abu Mashar's abbreviation to the introduction. And there are a lot. I guess I should have counted them. So including the 9 that I just talked about, the 9 that we have from like the Hellenistic tradition, Abu Mashar's greater introduction introduces 35 other lots. And some of them are cool, like the lot of Life, the lot of Hillaj, the lot of the Abscissor. These are lots that I've played around with when it comes to like length of life calculations or like critical health period stuff. Points that are more likely to be heavily impacted by directions when somebody falls seriously ill or gets really injured. But then you kind of go into like weird lots, like the lot of Navigation. If you're lost, it's a lot of navigation. The lot of Pleasure. And then my favorite one, it's called like in the text, it's called like the lot of discrimination of sex of an unborn child is kind of like the big long name of it. Basically, it's like whether or not you're going to have a boy or a girl, and I like to call it the lot of gender reveal. So you have the lot of gender reveal and its partner, the lot of ecological disaster, because you can't have one without the other. Like the sun and the moon. What is a gender reveal without a forest fire poisoning a community's water supply? It wouldn't be the same. We can't. We have moved so far beyond just cutting into a pink or blue cake, right? So basically, you have a system. You have like this 2-tiered system where it's the 9 Hellenistic lots, the Hermetic lots, and then Basis and Exaltation, and then everybody else is sort of like in the second class, coach class, smushed together in the back of the plane. But like I said, as time kind of goes on, even the Hermetic lots kind of fall from use. And I think a lot of it has to do with being very unsure of how they're utilized, whereas there's a lot of information about Fortune that gets talked about. Like Fortune comes back a lot. So one sort of unique characteristic of the lots is that many of the lots are said to have their formulas reversed if they're being calculated in a night chart. So what I mean by this is a lot of Fortune, for instance. In a day chart, you take the distance from the sun to the moon and you calculate that from the ascendant. But if it's a night chart, you start with the moon and then you go to the sun and you do that distance from the ascendant. And this is going to be different because the idea is that you calculate it based on zodiacal direction. So like if your sun and moon are, close apart, or like 15 degrees apart or whatever, you do like sun to the moon, they're 15 degrees apart. I'll take that from the ascendant. Cool. But at night, you go from the moon all the way back around to the sun, and then you go that direction then you go that far from the ascendant. So that's the sort of like the reverse part happening here. So that's one level of complexity, the idea that the calculation will be reversed day or night. But another layer of complexity added on top of it is that sometimes the identity of the lots will change based on day or night. So I've already talked about how the lot of fortune reverses, how it goes from the sun, the distance between the sun and the moon from the ascendant during the day, and the distance from the moon to the sun from the ascendant during the night. But that's the lot of Daimon's calculation. Like the day formula for the lot of Daimon is from the moon to the sun, and then at night it's from the sun to the moon. So the lot of fortune and the lot of Daimon flip their identities around completely based on the sect of the chart, based on whether it's a day chart or a night chart. None of the other Hellenistic era lots do this. They're all sort of calculated from the same. There's not like another double up like there are between the luminaries. Everything else is like from a planet to a lot. But there are some of the other lots that are introduced later through like the Persian and Arabic tradition that will flip or change identities based on this. So this reversing and this identity swapping, obviously it raises the question of why do we do this? Why should we do this? What purpose does this sort of extra step serve? And we don't really have a good answer for that, I don't think. Our earliest sort of deep dives into the lots come from, of course, the Hellenistic era of astrology. Rhetorius, the Egyptian, and Paulus Alexandria give us our kind of first looks at the lots. And in these books, we are explicitly told that the lots flip for day and night. Like their points of beginning and end are reversed at night. We're not really told why, kind of like I said. There is something to be said, and I do think there's a good argument here that can be made for like maintaining the sect movement for the chart. So like the lot of fortune is supposed to be the lot of the moon. And during the day, it goes from the sun, who is the sect light, to the moon, which is the off-sect light. And then at night, it goes from the moon, which is the sect light, to the sun, which is the off-sect light. So there's kind of this idea of like going to darkness, like going to the off-sect light, going to the thing that's not turned on right now. And then a lot of Daimon kind of mimics this. During the day, it goes from the moon, which is turned off, to the sun, which is turned on during the day. And then at night, it goes from the sun, which is turned off at night, to the moon, which is turned on at night. So it's like you have light bulbs, and the lots are moths. And Daimon wants the light. Daimon's like, yes, give me that light bulb. And Fortune is like, no. Just no. I don't want that light. And I think that's interesting to kind of dig into and look at. And kind of, like, from that perspective, I think is really interesting. And so that's kind of the way that it was done in the Hellenistic tradition until we got to Ptolemy. And Ptolemy was like, yeah, we're not doing that. This is silly. I don't want this. And what Ptolemy really dug into when he says that we shouldn't reverse the lot is he saw a mirrored relationship between the sun and the ascendant and the moon and the lot of fortune. So what I mean by that is, if you use the day formula for the lot of fortune, if you go from the distance from the sun to the moon and reflect that from the ascendant, 100% of the time, the lot of fortune will be as distant from the moon as the sun is from the ascendant. So you have this idea of the lot of fortune as like this hidden lunar ascendant. And this really speaks back to some of our earliest utilizations of the lot of fortune. In Manilius's Astronomica, our oldest extant astrological text, he talks about a separate system of houses that are derived from the position of the lot of fortune, kind of acting as a hidden secret ascendant degree. Valens talks about this too. So we already have this like deeply ingrained technique of a whole other set of system of a chart, basically like your lunar fortune chart, which is determined from the position of your lot of fortune. Which is sort of mirrored in your like actual birth chart, where that same relationship between the moon and the lot of fortune is reflected in this in the sun and the ascendant relationship. And I think that is super interesting to think about, because if you reverse that, like if you go at night and you reverse that, then you don't have that. Like the moon and the lot of fortune don't have that same relationship as the sun and the ascendant. Now it's flipped to where the moon and the ascendant will have the same relationship as the sun and the lot of fortune. And I think it can be really easy to say like, oh, well then it's still intact, right? You have the sect light and the ascendant having the same relationship as the offset light and the lot of fortune. But I don't think that's as impactful when it's the sun. Like, what does the sun care? What relationship does the sun have to the lot of fortune? The lot of fortune is not the lot of the sun, it's the lot of the moon. So I think it's very baked into a lot of the symbolism for like the lot of fortune, the lot of daimon, that they should maintain their formula regardless of day and night. And so I have stopped flipping the lots for a long time now. I haven't flipped the lots. But yeah, so that's sort of there you go. That's what I wanted to talk about. This is me propagandizing to you, preaching to you why you should stop reversing the lots. First of all, it's just another complicated step, and who can keep up with it? Second of all, I do think you lose a really interesting intrinsic mirror. And I think that's important, even if you don't look at the chart, even if you don't look at like this other lunar ascendant, like this other like lot of fortune ascendant chart. I don't think you have to do that to keep that kind of mirrored image intact, because it's always going to be there, regardless if you go and you think that technique is useful or something that you utilize at all. Just the idea that this relationship is constantly maintained, I think, is really powerful. But all right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. That's all I had to share with you or talk to you about today. I hope that the information here has given you sort of something new to think about with the lots, kind of a different way to conceptualize them, or, relate them to other points and planets within your chart. And, try it out. Don't just take my word for it. This is something that's worked out for me, that I've reasoned, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, give it a shot. Flip the lots. Don't flip the lots. Compare. See how they act differently with one another, and like how they work together in different techniques to work things out. Because even in my situation, when I did like zodiacal releasing from the lots, I'm a night chart, so how my things work out are going to be different. Even when I did like zodiacal releasing, things didn't really line up how I expected them to until I stopped reversing the lots, and it was like, oh, okay, here we go. Now we're moving forward with things. So yeah, do that same experiment. Having the rationale behind it is one thing, but if that experience doesn't quite work out for you, then there's obviously something wrong, and you're going to have to find out what that is. So don't just take my word for it. Get in there, experiment with it, use those lots however you normally use the lots, and see what those differences in not reversing affect it. So obviously this is something that only night people are going to really have any experience with. So day people, you're just going to have to take our word for it. All right? But all right, everybody take care, and I will see you all again on our Pisces new moon for our magical elections.